United States of America. But it's that complexity and it's that acknowledging of that complexity out of many one people. And, you know, you could move from that to just about anything, you know, out of many experiences, one experience, out of many cultures, one culture.
What do you know about how the East Indians came to Jamaica?
Well, shortly after the emancipation of the slaves, again, you know, going back to some of the agreements that were set up with the Maroons, then you had a new need for workers or for laborers in the field. You know, with the ending of slavery, there had to be a transition time. I mean, you know, ending slavery didn't just reap all the sugar cane and take care of that. So there was still a need for extensive laborers in the field. And so there was a contract set up for, you know, on some levels a year to maybe 7 years, where you would have indentured servants coming in from India. And these people came over in droves, were promised land and were given land and settled in certain areas of Jamaica and really kept their culture. And even to this day, you see many of these Indians who have kept up the music, kept up many of the religious practices. A lot of the food, they have great influence in Jamaica in terms of, you know, some of the seasoning,
curry chicken,
the curry chicken, the curry goat, and many of the spices that they brought to Jamaica. And so the Indians were a short-term response to the freeing of the slaves.
Why didn't they just hire the slaves, the former slaves, the English?
Well, the problem, I believe, was that many of the slaves didn't want to, work. Many of the slaves who at that time had their own land preferred to do their own farming, to look after their own property rather than work for the master of the past. So it wasn't easy. And, you know, keep in mind that slavery was not a system that built trust. I don't think the ex-slaves had much slave. That's right.
But you have ex-slaves with choice. But I think you're stepping hard on another, I think, part of the Jamaican personality, is that given the choice, the Jamaican is not going to have his oppressor hire him. It's not to happen. That idea in the brain can't work. I think, and there's also this independence where, given the opportunity, I can make enough to sustain me and mine. With all this ferment and desire not to be dominated, and in fact the desire to be free and to lead self and to grow large and be all that God might have intended, how did Jamaica remain under English colonialism so long, and how did they get out of it without a revolution or war?
Well, on so many levels, the whole colonial system was a very well-organized system. It had its checks and balances. It had its, you know, everything that it needed to keep the system going as long as the colonial power wanted it to go.
Which was a much more complex system than many know, because they brought in the Lebanese to do, they often had something to do with marketing. The Chinese had been brought in to build a railroad. When you say it was a complex system, I learned from my own broader family is that, you know, most of the people in Jamaica who taught nursing were Irish nurses brought from Ireland. And so I have some pictures of my mother and her nursing classes, and it's all Irish nurses. And this connection, right. I mean, English colonialism was complex. Go ahead.
That's right. And certainly one of the ways that they kept control was the way they punished those who tried to revolt against the system. And the punishment was quite brutal. the way they divided the families to ensure that different tribes and different people couldn't always get together to plan meetings, the way they controlled the gathering of different groups during the day or in the evening. And so slavery was maintained by a heavy hand. But what brought down the system of slavery, I think you could attribute that to two main things. The abolitionist movement already happening in Europe and North America. And so there was a backlash in the power center of these colonial powers, of people who were pushing and saying, you know, we can't be civilized countries and maintain this horrific system.
Well, let's say a little about the facts of Jamaica. Jamaica has about 2.5 million people,
Right. That's right.
And it's 44 miles long from east to west, and its greatest width is 49 miles from St. Ann's Bay on the north coast to Portland Point in the south.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little of the geography. Now,
Right.
I know you grew up in Kingston, which I consider to be the city. It's like growing up in New York City of Jamaica. And my father grew up in Montego Bay, which is the other New York City.
Right.
And then my mother grew up in a place called Mandeville, which is up in the mountains in the middle, and it is not New York City. In fact, Mandeville was a very cool place, and during the period of the English colonialism, many of the English loved to go there to vacation and even to live because it was cooler.
Right.
Which created, I think, my mother was a very complex lady because in some odd way, she's very like an English person. And it came from being from that part of the island. So let's have you talk some about what if you grew up in Kingston, how do you grow?
That's a good question. I think one of the advantages of growing up in Kingston was that Kingston was the capital, is the capital city and was the main city in Jamaica for many years. During the late 80s and early 90s, there was this